why does he think the pursuit of civil discourse is so important?
Yeah, so the pursuit of civil discourse, I mean, it seems very broad, right? Like there's just so many different avenues in which we can approach this subject. You can look at freedom of speech, you can look at our institutions, you can look at our governments, and you can even look at it in the family unit. And it really comes down to how are we framing our dialogue with the people we engage in? How are we framing the sort of definitions by which we discuss with people? I think what it comes down to is, the sort of obvious foundation, the obvious platform on which we decide to discuss is there's a open atmosphere. There's an open discussion where, anybody can have the sort of free flowing of ideas coming from them, and to actually have the second person that they're engaged with listen and look at them and engage with what they're saying. And after that, it's like, well, you also have to respect the person that you're talking to too. Like it's like you have to understand that, you have to respect your elders, obviously. So you have to listen to those who are older and more wiser and smarter, but also question them and also question the sort of already established truths that have been sort of foregone in the past, that have been sort of, ingrained in us or taught from a young age, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I think that to add on to what you just said about, respecting elders, but I think what needs to be said in more general terms is just the importance of listening to whoever you're talking to. There's a lot of examples today that we have for you of people not listening to each other, let's just say the least. And I think one of the biggest issues is when people start to identify with groups of people rather than themselves as individuals, because they get in this mob culture mentality, and their sense of being self-aware just completely fades away, and they just say and chant and scream, and they don't listen to each other. And I think that, whether you're young, old, black, white, Hispanic, Catholic, Jewish, whatever, you have to be willing to look and listen to someone, regardless of what identity they have.
Or presuppositions you may have about them, yeah.
Exactly. Don't assume anything. But we'll get into more of that later in regards to how we can actually accomplish civil discourse. What we want to get into right now is the current problems with civil discourse. Because today, man, it is pretty bad. I mean, me and Trevor, we were in Washington, D.C. just the other day, talking to some of these protesters and some of the people who, are just kind of fed up with this whole gun rights issue. And the problem is that people aren't willing to listen to each other, because if you go against whatever they say, well, you hate children and you want to be, and they think that you're evil. And that, and that's not going to open up the debate. Nobody wants children to die except for maybe some very sick people. But it's hard to, and that's a problem with overgeneralizing an entire group of people as being, not wanting to save the children. So I think
when you have some of these gun activists or anti-gun activists, at least in the media today, a lot of them seem to be younger high school kids. Who, they experience a tragic, horrendous event, but yet they want to sort of project their anger onto the politicians and the sort of advocates of Second Amendment and all these things. It's like, obviously we understand that you're upset and that, this is a terrible, terrible event. And it's like, you deserve to be heard and listened to, and your concerns at least brought into the debate. However, the way that these kids are being paraded around and, brought into these big groups of, just these herds of marches and protests and not necessarily riots, but, just these large gatherings. And it's like, you have to listen to the rhetoric that's coming from the people who are leading these movements. And it's like, it is the older ones. They have the sort of the the pedestal that they put on, let's say the David Hoggs and all those the prominent ones that are seem to be well articulated and well spoken. However, they're venting their frustrations in very, very just horrendous ways. I'm sorry, you cannot equate people in the top of the NRA and people who support the NRA and Republican politicians. You cannot equate them with child murderers. You just can't do it. It dilutes that accusation. It dilutes the actual action in which these sort of evil events and horrendous events actually occur. And I can't believe that this debate that the mainstream media has let that sort of narrative dominate this debate, this conversation.
So let's start to transition here. We want to kind of talk about just everybody knows about the Women's March, the March for Our Lives, Black Lives Matter, Antifa. There's all these groups that get together and protest. And, it's not just on the left side, even though it is predominantly on the left side. There are Republican groups and Trump-supporting groups that go around and do the exact same thing where they're just screaming and not engaging in civil discourse. So what we want to do is, Trevor, if you don't mind pulling up the AIDS Skrillex.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we're going to show you one of the more iconic examples of something gone awire in one of these large protests.
So here's a good video where we're going to show you with sort of a back and forth between Owen Troyer and a few protesters. This is a couple years back. This is during the election time, but I think it shows very well the sort of atmosphere that seems to be plaguing the left and their right. sort of and to a certain extent the polarization that is occurring. And how can we approach these situations, and how can we sort of have a better approach and where we actually engage in real dialogue and we're actually in pursuit of an answer or a new sort of solution that maybe we can find some common ground.
One of the biggest communists ever murdered people in the streets.
Does Hitler not remind you of that? Does Trump not remind you of that?
No, explain to me how Trump is like Hitler.
Mass abortion.
The list would be shorter if we
mass abortion. So obeying the law. Donald Trump wants to obey the laws on immigration. Donald Trump wants to
vet. This country was founded on immigration.
Illegal immigrants. People who came here legally.
Where does it start? Because we're all immigrants.
Where do you draw the line?
Okay, all right. So let's do it. So we're just gonna, because some things happened in history, we can't make things better now. We can't live in reality. Oh, because illegal immigrants may have came here. Oh, because the Ku Klux Klan used to have reign in this country. We can't move forward. We can't move forward and act like people can be unified. Black people and white people can't be unified for Trump. That's bullcrap.
Trump refuses to denounce the KKK.
He refuses to denounce the KKK. This guy's back.
Donald Trump, you better believe I'm back, because I'm a real one. You can't get it no real than me. And if you gonna have the audacity to sit up here and say you believe in Donald Trump in 2016, you are flat out racist. Anybody in that damn line, he's damn right.
You don't even know.
You know why? You know why? Because you know why?
You spewed a lot of racist bullshit.
That's right. You know why? You know why I know you're racist? Because you're in that line. Donald Trump said what y'all want to say. You know what I always heard y'all say? We want our country back. Bullshit. Black and white. No more
Who
white.
said this?
No more white.
I dream of a country where people can be looked at by the character and not the color of your skin.
Well,
You
that's
say you're not
not
racist,
what Trump
but
is
you want to
doing.
divide people by black and white.
Looking at brown people.
1916.
A wall. Mexico has a wall on their southern border. Is that racist?
Y'all racist. This 2016, not 1916. The good old white days are over with. The good old white days are over with. Ain't no more of them days, bro. It's over.
That's not
the good
racist.
old, no,
I'm
that's telling the
racist,
truth.
though.
That's
I'm
telling the
racist.
truth.
That's not racist. I'm racist.
Hell no, that's not racist. That's telling the
You've
truth.
never experienced
That's
oppression
telling
in
the
your
truth.
entire
How do
fucking
you know
life.
that?
Neither have
You
I.
don't know me.
You're fucking a white male.
So?
You're a white man.
White people don't know what it's like to be poor.
Bullshit.
Well, there it was. That is AIDS Skrillex. As you can see, it's quite the mess. People just screaming at each other, calling each other effing white males, calling each other racists. And, you know, you really can see kind of a divide on, like, you know, who wants to start the conversation, who wants to talk truth in this situation, the people who are just kind of, you know, calling him Hitler and calling him racist and calling him all these, you know, labels and broad generalizations that aren't really productive. Although I do have to say that he kind of went, because I think he did go into that trying to find some truth, but the problem is that since those people are in a group of people, like I was saying earlier, like it kind of makes the individual fade away and the group kind of takes over, and you have this kind of like hive mind that's kind of influencing the words that are coming out of these people's mouths. They're not really being self-conscious of each other. You know, they think they're winning because of the social validation and the you know, just, essentially just the social validation. It makes you think that you're right, even if you're wrong. It's very dangerous. And let's get Trevor's idea on this.
Right? You know, this is the danger of groupthink. And even before that, it's like there's a few specific points in that video that we have to really analyze. And it's the one gentleman who he had the glasses on and he accused, you know, how is Trump not like Hitler per se? And it's like, if you can't predicate an argument on, you know, how is it not that? You know what I mean? It's like sometimes you can prove things by some sort of, I guess, trying to find a contradiction to something, which is important. But it's like you can't predicate the discussion immediately on how is he not like Hitler? And it's like that's such a broad statement. It's just inherently meant to provoke a sort of negative emotion, negative perspective on the actual frame of the debate. So, and then moving past that, it's, you know, you look at it, you know, oh, you're a white male, you've never been oppressed, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's, you know, if you're gonna, I don't think you can just presuppose by somebody's appearance what sort of oppression they've experienced.
Tucker Carlson video because of this.
Yeah, we should take a look at that too.
He gives like a really good example, Tucker Carlson, of what he's just talking about, which is that broad generalization and reducing people to the group identity and not, you know, allowing them an out as an individual. It's like this person doesn't know who Owen Schroyer is. Abe Skrillex doesn't know who Owen Schroyer is, yet he's reducing him down to his, you know, broad generalization of what white people are, you know, saying that he's not oppressed, et cetera, and essentially reducing him to his skin color, not his actual character.
And that's exactly. You cannot just go into a debate and just accuse somebody and just try to list off sort of a hierarchy or a sort of some sort of value system on how much oppression they've experienced. Therefore, if they've experienced more oppression, then somehow their sort of standpoint standpoint perspective gives them more precedence in the debate at hand. Yeah. And so then that kind of sort of goes into intersectionality, which we'll also get into later in this podcast. But back to the sort of divisive back and forth that we saw there, and it's all just rhetoric. It's all just feeling, you know, just, you know, buzzwords, racist, sexist, you know, fascist, you know, buzzwords that just really have blanket statements where you just assume every sort of perspective this individual has will just fall in line. It's like every single person holds contradictions, and that's what you have to try to find with people. You have to find where their philosophy or maybe their politics or their culture is contradicting. And that's like you can't necessarily go in assuming the contradiction. You have to find it. And so and I guess that's all about
that Tucker Carlson video that kind of gets into this whole idea of, you know, reducing people to this group identity, which is dangerous and, you know, wrong, just like Trevor had said, because it basically is going to not allow for the open dialogue that we require in order to find truth. So here we go.
I want to tell you about an op-ed that ran in the New York Times over the weekend you might not have seen. The writer, who's a law professor in New York called Echo Yonka, asked a simple question: can my children be friends with white people? He really asked it, and he wasn't optimistic. Quote, "I will teach my boys the lesson of generations old," he wrote. "I will teach them to be cautious. I will teach them suspicion. I will teach them distrust. I will teach my boys to have profound doubts that friendship with white people is possible. impossible. Well, those doubts mirrored the writer's own, as he put it, quote, history has provided little reason for people of color to trust white people. The point I'm making is that you should never generalize about people on the basis of their skin color, because it reduces them to the sum total of their skin color. And again, that's the definition of racism, and you're engaging in it in this piece, and I don't think it's helpful.
Now that we've gotten into the broad generalizations, we kind of want to transfer into intersectionalism and what that is, and how this is kind of like the root of what causes civil discourse to be impossible.
Yeah, it's just there's just so many different ways that we can sort of approach this. Even it's like there's intersectionality, for one, is very it's very just. It's all ideology, and it's or not ideology. It's entirely it relies on a pathological sort of understanding of a sort of classism, or you know what I mean? Like, it's like, everything's based on sort of this distributed hierarchy that is entirely socioculturally constructed. Mm-hmm. And the way that they come at it is like, okay. And the example that I heard, at least the main one is, imagine an intersection, right, on a street, right? You have let's say First Street on going horizontal here, and then you have let's say First Avenue going vertical, whatever, and you take these two planes, and these are planes of oppression. And especially for people of minority groups. So they make these group distinctions. Now they'll be like, okay, so you have a person of color experiencing oppression on this avenue or this street, and then you have, let's say, a woman on this street experience oppression, and this person of color who is also a woman is right smack dab in the intersection, and they're getting hit with all sorts of oppression, and they cannot see what direction it's coming from, and it's so okay.
So we can switch kind of here. We can get a nice. That was a perfect example of what intersectionality really is. I mean, it's kind of fun because you're just comparing it with an actual intersection that's easy for people to understand. So if we can just switch here to my laptop, as you can see. The intersectionality, the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and independent systems of discrimination or advantage. See, now that doesn't sound too bad right off the bat. It's like, okay, yeah, if I'm, let's say I'm in Nazi Germany and I'm a Jew and I'm also handicapped, right? Well, the Nazis are going to persecute that person, say, maybe harsher than just the Jew or the handicapped by themselves. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, with this modern progressivist liberal thinking, is that the more categories that you can fit yourself into, the more discriminated, victimized groups that you're a part of, the more worth what you have to say.
Yeah, the more valid your opinion of objective reality is.
Exactly.
It's your position in this intersectionality realm, or basically whatever world that this is that's what decides your value and your worth and your opinions
exactly
worth.
So if
that is just, to me, is just incredibly dangerous.
Yes. So if I'm a white male and I go up to, say, let's say just a Democratic district convention, let's say, and there's a lot of minorities there, just because I am not a part of one of the so-called victimized groups, what I have to say is less, and I actually have to sit on the sidelines and let the people who are so-called victimized speak, because they have a better perspective on what the suffering and pain and reality of life is. And while, clearly I don't have their experience in life, to say that what my experience is completely invalid based off of nothing but what I look like is completely ridiculous and racist by definition.
By definition.
And so it's this idea that, we're being nice by, making sure that these victimized groups have a platform, but at the same time, we're also, generalizing, marginalizing, and delegitimizing entire groups of people purely based off of what they look like in comparison to these victimized groups. So this is intersectionalism, and this is why I think this is the biggest problem, because basically just because of the way I look, the people I identify with, I am completely invalid. And so now we're going to kind of transfer to some of these other videos that we have of intersectionalism. We have this one of, I believe it's a feminist talking about her experience with sexual assault, and then a trans woman who is really a man coming up and essentially saying that trans women are more victimized than regular women, and here we go with this heated debate between two marginalized groups.
This is just you have to listen closely and just really pay attention to the rhetoric and the sort of back and forth between these two individuals who, from a sort of glance, you'd think would be on the same side, because they seem to be sort of this feminist, leftist, social justice approach, but yet they're turning against each other because their inherent ideology is a contradiction. It's conflicting.
Flawed.
It's just flawed. So, and this is the sort of problems that they will continue to run into, and we just hope that this doesn't actually happen on the global stage, that this doesn't happen on the sort of political stage in our country. But here's that video for you.
Because maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly. Yes, thank you.
We can all learn from each other.
I have a suggestion. Talk about what you said on RuPaul. Trans women are dying, and you said that we, as trans women, are not like regular women. We get raped more often. We go to domestic violence more often. A trans woman was killed here a few blocks. I have been followed home.
So have I. So have I. We're the same. My point was we are the same. There's an entire show called ID Channel, a network dedicated 24 hours a day to women getting abused, murdered, sexualized, and violated. And you are too, sister.
And trans
it's
women
the
go to
same.
domestic violence, and you do nothing for them. Trans women are in men's prisons. And what have you done for them?
What have you done for women?
Lots of things.
I've done lots of things too. You don't know my life. Don't sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Enough. Get lost.
I am a woman, and trans women.
Congratulations. So am I. So am I.
This is genocide. This is the AIDS crisis all over again. And this is white, cis, feminism.
Shut up. You're so boring.
White, cis, feminism.
Don't label me, sister. Don't put your labels on me. Don't you fucking do that.
Don't worry about her.
Do not put your labels.
All right.
Well, where do you even start with those? I mean, it's insanity, but, and even to start with the first part of the video with Trudeau and, with the whole people kind and mankind, this is the insanity that, we're running into on the left. And so, but to take, we still have to take this seriously, right? We still have to, understand, where these people are coming from and why it's just so flawed. And I'd like to let's look at these. Let's say the transgender versus feminist sort of debacle that happened there. That is intersectionality at its sort of prime.
At its finest,
so
yes.
you have the trans woman, or the man who thinks he's a woman, identifies himself with his group. The sort of trans woman sort of approach where they, how he said. Trans women are raped more, he actually came up, he first said, we are raped more often. That's what he said.
We are more victimized.
It's basically saying we are more victimized. So he's not actually paying attention to his own identity. He's identifying himself with the group that he's a part of rather than himself. Or her, whatever you want to be. If he's an individual, then maybe I could address them as a her or a she. But however, they're identifying as a group. So it's like, well, if you're identifying as a group, what do I even call you? Do I call you them? Do I,
Yeah, that's one of them.
Exactly. So it's like it's so confusing. Like I can't even keep it straight in my own head. Mm-hmm. So.
Yes. So he goes and essentially just plays the victim, right? That's one tactic that is, it's not only common in politics today, it's extremely common in just talking with, if you're having a problem with your family, or if you're having a problem with whoever it is, your close partner. It's like, who's ever, the hurt the most, who's ever in the most pain, who's ever suffering the most is somehow the more virtuous one. And it's extremely dangerous because it's essentially just making people submit to each other. It's making people guilty. It's making people feel bad. Guilt is not a good thing. It destroys you. It makes you depressed. And if you look at it, people are extremely depressed in the left. And we'll get into that later. And they're extremely depressed, transgender women, feminine. Like we're the most depressed generation that has ever existed today. And we'll show you some statistics about that later. But now we're going to transition kind of into what can kind of provoke this victim playing, is this provocation that happens more so actually on the right, I would say, than the left. So Trevor, what do you think you have to say about that?
Provocation. So yeah,
Yes.
so like, right there, we can see, she's trying to provoke a response from this feminist that, I'm more oppressed, therefore you must address me, and a sort of on a pedestal. I have to be taught, I have to be treated specially. I have to give me trigger warnings when you're talking, do these certain special things for me because I'm such a big victim. Therefore I'm more soft, and therefore you must treat me differently.
Shut up, yikes.
And then it's so on and so forth. It's just like, here we go again in this sort of this loop that our history takes us, where it's just group lines around everything. So it's like, okay, we have the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat in the Soviet Union. You have the nationalists and the Maoists in China. You have, this happened in the U.S. during the Civil War. You had the pro-union sort of freedom fighters, and then you had the sort of slave-keeping Confederates who were, trying to stand up for their states' rights, as they like to proclaim. However, after this, it's like every single time we divide groups into certain sort of distinguishing characteristics, we get conflict. And this is the part of the freedom. This is where the freedom framework comes in, and we have to look at what our founders said about this as well. This is why they put in the First Amendment, and this is why this this entire show is actually sort of framed around the First Amendment. And so you have this sort of idea that you have freedom of speech. You have sort of this thought that, if we have an open marketplace for ideas, the good ones will rise to the top and the bad ones will actually sink to the bottom and lose prominence. And I don't think we're seeing that today, because there is a sort of controlled, doctored sort of foundation that we're creating around speech, whether it's in our social media,
it's in the education system,
our actual media things, our education system. Like when you make things like, oh, you have to ban hate speech. Well, who defines hate speech? Who actually defines hate speech? And I'm going to tell you what, it's not the people you want defining it, because it's who are the activists that are going to be sort of authoring these sort of guidelines,
and more importantly, who are funding the activists,
that too,
who are creating the talking points,
exactly, and who is guiding the talking points. And so, and it comes into even the compelled speech laws that we see in Canada, right? So we have Bill C-16 that has always been, we've all heard about this. They have compelled speech in regards to transgender people, where they actually tell you that you're committing a crime if you don't call them by what, or if you don't pretend to call, or if you don't call them by what they demand to be called, if you don't go along with their sort of fantasy world that they want to live in, rather than actually working in reality and accepting their sort of situation that everyone is dealt in. If you don't accept the world in which you live in, then you're just going to be miserable. It's simple as that. It's like, yes, we're all born into very unique situations, right? There's maybe levels of oppression, but like if you can't just sit around and do nothing about it. You have to find yourself. You have to go out into the world without these sort of preconceived notions that it's so oppressive, so grotesque, and monstrable that, you're just going to be resentful and bitter about it the whole time.
So what you said earlier about, we kind of grow up in different situations, and this can kind of all lead back to identity. And this is a huge one because, our identity consists of multiple different facets. It consists of our beliefs. It consists of what we look like. It consists of where we were raised. It consists of where we live. It's just a conglomeration of all these things. And when we were, I guess chimps, for lack of a better term, we had this idea of ourselves, like we were kind of embodied, right? We were just going around, like when things were a threat to our identity or ourselves, our perceived selves, certain parts of our brain got activated as a result. Parts that made us feel anger, parts that made us feel fear, parts that made us feel all these emotions that are quite negative. So when somebody's attacking your identity, whether you're in a political debate, whether you're talking with your friends and somebody's calling you a fag or somebody's calling you a liberal or whatever it is that might offend you, the parts of your brain that are going to be activated are going to cause you to have these kind of sort of adverse reactions, these negative emotions, rage, anger, fear, etc. And this kind of gets into this whole identity politics things, because the parts that really, really touch people are when, you attack them for what they look like. And but the problem is like, because that's like the most prevalent thing in our consciousness, like when we're having a discussion with people, it's like us versus them. So we have this identity, and it makes people extremely polarized. And this identity politics has been extremely pervasive for as long as I remember. Like in school, just growing up, having all of these people, just talk politics, and it's all about, oh, you're rich, oh, you're poor, oh, you're black, oh, you're white, oh, you're gay, oh, you're not. It's like, it's not productive in the slightest sense. It's not a discussion of ideas, like Trevor said. It's not going to get us to any truth. It's just going to make us hate each other and ourselves more and more. And so we're going to now kind of switch into the science of this outrage and this polarization that is a result of the intersectionalism, identity politics, and provocation. So I suppose... what do you think?
So the biggest thing is like, what causes this polarization? It's like almost always it's this sort of anger that sort of builds up in people, right? So people, like, as soon as you get confronted with something that may challenge your identity, I think it provokes something in your mind that is actually attributed to almost being threatened. You get your senses heighten, your adrenaline starts pumping, and all these things. And it's like there are literally, there is a mechanism in your brain that is triggering this, because it's this sort of identity conflict that is just inhibited or engaged with in your mind when you are challenged ideologically, or you're challenged, in your own education sort of programmed thinking. And so, when the almost immediate reaction is this feeling of anger, and so it gets out of you, and it's like almost the thing about anger is that it always wants to win. It always wants to it never wants to, concede defeat, because that's what anger inherently does. And Jordan Peterson had something very interesting to say about this.
Yes, we'll get into that in a second. Yeah, we'll get because I want to actually show them some of the science of where the parts of the brain that activate, these adverse responses that Trevor just got talking about, rage, anger. I don't know if you heard of Sam Harris, but he is a neuroscience, and he did a study with a few other people here. Trevor, if you don't mind just switching over to this, I will give I believe this is the introduction. So I'm just gonna read off to you just kind of what was explained here. In this study, we performed a functional MRI to measure the brain activity of 40 individuals with strong political views as they encountered arguments against their beliefs. All the subjects were self-identified as political liberals of deep conviction. Inside the fMRI scanner, participants saw a series of statements they previously indicated strongly believing, followed by several challenging counter-arguments. After participants read all 5 counter-arguments, the original statement was shown again, and they reported their post-challenge belief strength. The difference between pre-scan and post-challenge ratings was used as a measure of belief change in order to compare high belief persistence to low belief persistence. In one condition, we challenged strongly held political beliefs, and in another condition, we challenged the strongly held non-political beliefs. While the non-political beliefs were just as strongly held according to the participants who held them, we did not expect these beliefs to be defended with the same vigor. We predicted that the political condition would result in less belief change than the non-political condition, and that resisting challenges to political beliefs would be associated with increased activity in brain systems involved in contemplating identity and internally focused cognition, so like what we were talking about earlier. Furthermore, we predicted that there would be a relationship between activity in emotion-related brain structures and individual differences in persuadability. We also thought to identify brain activity that correlated with the strength with which specific beliefs were maintained in our sample. Okay, so now after this, I'm going to switch here quickly to the parts of the brain that are actually activated as a result. And I'm going to read this too. Sorry for the long one, but I kind of want to make sure that you guys are getting, really solid information, and, we're not trying to screw you over here. So we're going to try to show you the real studies and the real, cutting edge science that's involved in kind of trying to figure out what is the problem. So we found that individual differences in resistance to belief change correlated with activity in the insular cortex and the amygdala. So the amygdala is actually the part of the brain that controls a lot of the emotions. The insular cortex, which receives projection from interoceptive neural systems that monitor the internal state of the body, is believed to be important for the generation of emotions and feelings. The anterior insula, in particular, is implicated in the process of integrating effective information into decision-making. In addition to reflecting the strength of the subjective feeling states in general, the anterior insula is activated by specific feelings that people are likely to encounter when their core beliefs are challenged, including perceptions of threat, uncertainty, and anxiety. So just like we were talking about earlier, some of the responses that are activated when these political challenges come up are indeed the things that would be activated when, say, we were chimps and there was a freaking snake in the tree. Okay, so we literally see other people like they're I guess demons, for lack of a better word. We see the worst in people that challenge our identity, and this is not healthy.
No, it's not. No.
Yeah, we'll kind of transfer over here to Trevor.
This is why we need to be aware of it. As long as we educate ourselves and understand exactly what's happening, it's like, I like to think that we are sort of we are, I guess, edging on. In a spiritual sense, I believe that humanity and humans are very good, and that we have immense capabilities and just great.
I'm not as optimistic.
Yeah, of course, I know. We'll get into that. And so I think there are things in us that we do have control over. You know what I mean? So you have to educate yourself about your capabilities. And so if you're not aware of these sort of programming and inherent sort of drives in your mind that sort of happen, that they can sort of take hold of you and sort of drive you sort of headlong into a direction that maybe you won't want to go. So that's why you have to take a second, you have to breathe, and you have to sort of approach people that aren't going to just, or that you're not immediately going to result in sort of a lashing defense or a lashing attack. And so it's civil discourse. And how does that happen? It happens with not letting your anger guide the discussion, because, like I said earlier, anger apparently is an emotion that is triggered when you are threatened, whether it's ideologically or even physically. And I guess your brain doesn't actually distinguish between the two, and so you'll have these sort of feelings that are very, violent in your mind, and they get out, I guess, verbally and emotionally. And so, the thing about anger, it seems, is that it only wants to win. It doesn't really want to sort of find any sort of truth or sort of long-lasting solution. It just wants sort of an immediate sort of submission of its opposition. And so it's sort of it provokes you to attack and defend yourself violently rather than civilly. And Jordan Peterson had an interesting. He was talking with Dave Rubin on the Rubin Report.
I want to get into that.
And they basically said, if you're not going to look at somebody and expect them to know something that you don't, then you're not going to learn anything, and you're going to run headlong into a brick wall.
Right. So before we get to kind of some of the things that will allow us to bridge kind of the divide, I want us to first get a really solid understanding of just kind of the science behind it. We want to understand the different ideas that people have of themselves, like Trevor mentioned earlier, the collectivist and the individualistic views of the self, the perception of the self, and which is activated in the insular cortex, which is a part of the mammalian brain. If you don't know this, there's actually 3 different parts of the brain. We have this thing called the reptilian brain, which basically controls your housekeeping, for lack of a better terms. Things like your breathing, your heart rate, basic, like very necessary physiological mechanisms that allow you to survive. And then we have our mammalian brain. Now, this is more related towards things like hunger, sex, sleeping, but it's also associated with our ideas of ourselves, and as well as the emotions that we feel. These are all activated by the part of our brain that is called the mammalian brain, the insular cortex, the amygdala, all of these parts, and working together. So Trevor, if you don't mind actually switching to the team view mode so I can show them a study. I want to get into this idea that morals, identities are kind of like an asset, essentially. We use these things. We're like, okay, how can I identify as a group? How can I fit in? It makes you feel good when you feel like you belong. Have you ever quoted, let's say, if you've ever watched Hercules, I will go anywhere to find where I belong, right? Yeah. I'll go most anywhere to feel like I belong. That's the one right there. I'll go most anywhere to feel like I belong. And so we use these kind of beliefs and identities to make us feel like we can fit into a society, and we almost use them as an asset. So this is a study that was done, or at least a paper that was made on they developed a theory of moral behavior based on individual and collective ideas of the self. And they kind of went into this, but I want to actually transfer here to another thing. I don't know. Why don't you talk about that while I pull up the some of the other ones?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's very easy for individuals to sort of find a group or even a self-identity that makes them feel comfortable, which is that is very important, right? You need to be comfortable with who you are, right? You can't just be in complete rejection to who you are, and if you are, then that's you're gonna experience a lot of sort of conflict and uneasiness that is going to be very hard to dig yourself out of, depending on the time frame in which that transgresses. And so in terms of identity, why it seems, at least if I'm taking my own perspective, my identity is sort of, yes, I have my own sort of intuitions, maybe my own desires that I have as an individual, but it seems like a lot of like who I am, the labels that are sort of slapped on me is all from my environment. It's all from my upbringing, my name, when I was born, the sort of the state that I live in, the country that I live in, the sort of they're not even preconceived, they're kind of sort of determined in these sort of descriptions and frameworks that society deems to be useful potentially. And so we have to take a step back and look and see, okay, why is it useful? Why could it be dangerous, and go from there rather than just accepting these presuppositions about ourselves in terms of how the world views us, and then take a step back and be like, why is it this way, and how can it go forward? And if you take, let's say, the male female dichotomy, it seems very obvious why that exists. And you can take a look at, history, you can take a look at archetypes, you can take a look at the spiritual union between two individuals, and it's very clear why male and female dichotomy exists. And so it's like, yes, we can move past that now. We've done that. It seems that sort of debate never seems to leave social, I guess, the social atmosphere, and I think that is for good reason, because that is a very, very important determination we have in humanity.
Yeah. So I kind of want to take us another step back here. Go back to, clearly there is some utility in seeing yourself as an individual or seeing yourself as a part of a group, right? Although I do have my own idea about, the difference in utility between those. I think that seeing yourself as an individual allows you to, maintain more self-control, allows you to be disciplined, allows you to take self-responsibility. But it's not as emotionally gratifying as being identified with a group, which is the collectivist philosophy. So if you want to essentially, feel good, it's a good idea to be a collectivist. But if you want to do good, then it is a good idea to be an individualist. So Trevor, if you don't mind switching over to the team viewer, so I can show them what the views of the self are. So here we have a Wikipedia page, and this is kind of basically a good synopsis of the different ways that we view ourselves. So it starts out, in order to explain how a human views him or herself, two different conceptual views of self-perception exist: the individualist and the collectivist views of self. The individualistic view of the self involves people's perception of themselves as a standalone individual. This is thought of as a somewhat permanent perception of oneself that is unaffected by environmental and temporary cues and influences. People who view themselves in an individualistic sense describe themselves with personality traits that are permanent descriptions unrelated to particular situations. The collectivist view of self, however, involves people's perceptions of themselves as members of a group or in a particular situation. The view people have of themselves in a collectivistic sense is entirely dependent on the situation they are in and the group with which they are interacting. These two ideas of self are also called self-construal styles. There is a neurobiological evidence supporting these two definitions of self-construal. fMRI data has been used to understand the biology of both of these individualistic and collectivist views of the self. So I kind of want to then transition into this kind of a thing called tribalism. Now you can see kind of where this collectivism is going to lead us, because a tribe, if you think about it, it's like a group of people, and here's the definition of tribalism: the state or fact of being organized in a tribe. Or derogatory. See, the behavior and attitudes that stem from the strong loyalty to one's own tribe or social group. Interesting. Why don't you expand on that, Trevor?
So there we have it. So that's, if you look at it, it's like, it seems very sort of, and I guess we're having a little issues with our live camera there. I guess we'll just reset that there. Well, we'll have to undo that.
Well, you keep talking. I'm just gonna
go fiddle with that. See if we can get that pop back on there. So it's basically, if we're looking at group distinctions, I guess it's sort of very abstracted away from the individual, and I guess the utility that people find there is that it sort of creates a. Do you just want to unplug it and plug it back in? The HDMI there. Yeah. So, sorry. Let me get back on my train of thought here.
Experiencing some technical difficulties.
Yep, there we go. Let's pop back up, yep.
Did the recording continue, however?
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, back to this sort of group distinction that people like to make. It's like, it sort of sets up this sort of abstract sort of, I guess, sort of mushroom around, what is and sort of how it all relates to it. Mm-hmm. This is like the epistemology that sort of, I guess, people sort of attribute. I like to call it sort of an island of epistemology. It's like, this is like what in-group, out-group distinction, I guess, leads to, is that, you have this sort of in-group, right? And all these people that, they subscribe to this certain idea, this certain sort of abstract idea, whether it's religion, whether it's a cultural identity, whether it's even a sort of national sort of pride or sort of the sorts. And so they just kind of, they create their own island of what, you know, what is true and how does it relate to them. It's like, well, if you challenge our truth, if you challenge, let's take religion, for example, where they sort of, they have this epistemology based around God, where God is this sort of perfect good that they establish, and you have somebody who comes up who is in the outgroup, let's say an atheist who is challenging the sort of the establishment of epistemology that this other group, this Christian sort of maybe it's a Christian fundamentalist group, and I'm talking mainly the radical ends here, the very excessive sort of extreme ends of these situations. And so the atheist comes in, they challenge this sort of good, the God, let's say, and from the in-group, these radical Christians, they'll say, oh, you're challenging good itself, therefore your opinions don't matter, your opinions are flawed because you're challenging good itself. And that's where just there's no debate, there's no discussion, there's no dialogue there. Now there's because this in-group is entirely sort of ostracizing this individual who is part of the out-group, who is trying to challenge them based on the fact that just because they raise questions, therefore they are challenging good, therefore we cannot have a debate because there is no established, truth, where it's like, well, if you're in the pursuit of truth, you have to understand that your view potentially may be skewed or may be fogged or may be, discerned from the actual sort of path that maybe everyone could get onto. You know, we don't know what that is, but we can at least try to have a discussion on how we get there. And so, and why this actually relates to intersectionality is because imagine, you know, the radical feminist being challenged by, let's say, myself, let's say a white male, if we're going to make these sort of group distinctions and identities, I come into them, they view me as the outgroup, they view me as, let's say, the atheist challenging God. I'm challenging their sort of perceived oppression or their, intersectional truth view. And so if I challenge it, therefore I'm challenging the existence of their oppression. I'm challenging the sort of good truth that they've determined, which is their sort of entirely conspired oppressed being that is entirely due to a social construct. And therefore now I'm pushed on the outgroup, and therefore I'm denied actual dialogue. And so it's like, this is the sort of contradiction that exists within them. It's like, if you approach any of these radical feminists, I guarantee you that they will be very anti-religion and very against this sort of tribal religious dogmas that seem to plague,
while creating their own tribe.
While creating, exactly. They're against the sort of tribalism, but yet they're creating their own tribe around it. And it's just perplexing.
So I kind of want to get back into this idea of the tribe. There's actually a lot of scientifically validated evidence to suggest that identification with groups, especially those that you see oppressed, is actually really, really bad for your mental health. So if you don't mind switching to my computer here, Trevor. Yeah, so here we go. Now this is like the psychology of the self, okay? So, and identity. So there's this part right here that states, one sense of self can be changed if they become a part of a group that they consider stigmatized. According to Cox, Abrahamson, Devine, and Holland in 2012, if an individual has prejudice against a certain group, like the elderly, and then later becomes part of this group, this prejudice can be turned inwards, causing depression.
Interesting.
Bum, bum, bum. Now, there are actually some studies to do this. I actually hadn't pulled them up, but if you go and find the Wikipedia page on the self and psychology of that, you'll easily be able to find it. But I kind of want to get, but what I kind of want to get into is just, if you really think about it, let's say, like you're like Hercules and you're trying to find a place where you feel like you belong, all right, and you end up finding one of your groups that you think are oppressed. You know, maybe they kind of look like you, you know, they kind of talk like you, they grew up in the same neighborhood, whatever, and you're like, oh, what do you know? I kind of fit in here. I'm going to go in and I'm going to try to identify with these group of people. And then they go in there and they find out, wow, we're oppressed. We're so, you know, it's not our faults that we're, you know, poor and beaten down, and, you know, and the fact that we're so depressed, and, you know, the suicide rates in our community are so high. And then what do you know? They identify with a group. They change their perception of self into something that is self-degradating, and, you know,
and rather than addressing that the actual inward sort of oppressed determinants that actually exist, it's very easy for them to blame the sort of the external abstract ideas. So it's like, since we're all experiencing this oppression, therefore it must be inherent in our objective world. It must be inherent that we are oppressed, because that is the structure of our culture. It's entirely social structure. So it's like, take a woman, for example, in this sort of pay gap and all this stuff. It's like, well, you have to look at, you know, why does this sort of pay gap exist? You know, why is there not this many, you know, why is there not an exact matching of demography in the sort of upper echelons of corporate America, you know, in terms of Fortune 500 companies, you know, who are on the board of directors, who are the officers in these companies? Why don't they match the demography of the citizens? Therefore, it must be corrupt, it must be discriminatory, and so on. But it's like, well, how about we look at, if we're going to take this sort of empirical or pragmatic view here, it's like, well, look at the other countries. Let's look at Scandinavia, for example, where you have relatively, I would say, some of the most progressive sort of governments and social movements in terms of gender parity, I think is the term, and gender, I guess, inequality, where it's actually sort of been brought into a sort of safe range, I guess, using their terms. And you look at, let's say, the healthcare industry in, let's say, these Scandinavian countries. Why is it that women dominate 20-1 compared to men? Why is it that in the engineering fields in Scandinavia that men dominate 20-1? Why is it that even in the United States, and if we bring it back to the United States, okay, why is it that, you know, women make 70 to 80% of the economic decisions in the household, but yet the marketers and the advertisers in most companies actually consists of mostly men? So it's like, men can, I guess, make advertisements and market to women. So why don't, you know, why isn't it women marketing and advertising to women? Would that be more effective? It's like, well, the advertising and marketing in the United States is actually some of the best in the world, and it's actually created massive amounts of wealth, massive abundance for our country, and it seems to be working just fine. So I don't see the pragmatic view here, and why and you know, where is the evidence that shows that this is a social cultural construct? It is clearly has to do with the personality differences between men and women. It clearly has to do with the sort of actual sort of inner workings of our brains that we have different interests.
Of our brains, let's take it back here. I kind of want to actually show them these statistics that show that you know, just kind of the general unhappiness. So if we're gonna let's just make a presupposition here, you know, based off of the evidence that we've gathered, that say liberals identify more as groups. Okay, they kind of promote this, you know, identity politics, intersectionalism. You know, it's a collectivist thought. Okay, they have collectivist thoughts. And so if we then show the studies that make people, you know, that suggest that when people change their identity to a group that they deem depressed or, you know, unhappy or whatever, and then they identify with that group, that they will then start to exhibit some of these negative feelings and emotions. So why don't you switch here to the team viewer. This is the anxiety and depression levels by political and gender cohorts. So if you can see here that, you know, on both ends of the spectrum of male and female, that liberals are indeed the most anxious and depressed of any political dissertation. So, I mean, you just see the evidence here. It's like, in Western society, we value individuals, okay? We value competence. We value competition. That's why we've been able to, like Trevor said, create so much good and economic worth in our country. The problem is that we have, kind of some systems in place, especially in our education system, that teach people that, identification with group and identification as, marginalized victims is the way to go, and that you are therefore more virtuous. I mean, just look at things like what's the thing where they let in people based affirmative action. Yeah. So just because you're some marginalized group, that you automatically, not even based off of competence, not based off of actual merit, but just purely based off of the fact that you look a certain way, you are then allowed better access and easier access into these institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think this is a good segue into maybe the next topic here. But
I do kind of want to get in actually quick to the right and left divide in your head, because we've been talking about this kind of polarization between actual individuals, but the problem is that it actually exists within yourself, and this will actually give you a better idea of why maybe the liberals have a collectivist ideology and the right might not have a collectivist ideology and have more of an individualistic ideology. Well, because you can see that actually liberals tend to be more right brain dominant than right wingers, which is very interesting, because if you know anything about the dichotomy between the two hemispheres of the brain, you would know that the right brain is associated more with holistic thinking, with thinking in the bigger picture. But the problem is that they often have underdeveloped left brains, which is more linear thinking, which is more reasonable thinking, step by step, which is more of a conservative way to think about the world instead of creative. You have to be able to merge the two in order for you to be able to see the world properly. Me, as a left-handed person, I'm right brain dominant. I see the holes in things. I see the bigger picture a lot of the times. I think in images, and I would consider myself kind of creative, and these are all traits of right-brained people. I'm an extremely open person. Liberals are more open than conservatives. That's a fact. Yep. Conservatives are more conscientious, however. I am not very conscientious. I am, however, a conservative. Yep. But let's just, you look here, you see that liberals, very liberal, 5.7% left brain responses, and 7% right brain responses. Actually, I don't know if that's...
Well, it seems to be more of a mean.
Yeah, it's a mean. It's a mean. It's not a percentage. My bad. But yeah, you can see the difference. So it's not that, we're actually, the real battle is inside of you. The real battle is right there. The right and left battle, the battle between the right and left is in you. And it has always been in you. So you have to learn how to merge and integrate the parts of yourself. You have to learn how to integrate your shadow and how to integrate the parts of you that you're not necessarily conscious of in order for you to actually get along with people who think differently than you.
And so you end up becoming sort of dominant in maybe one way or another, and therefore the sort of, like you said, the shadow of yourself becomes sort of a whipping tail, I guess, behind you, where it actually starts projecting itself on others and starts, lashing out on others. And and this is what, I guess the psychologist Carl Jung gets into with his whole shadow projection and all those sorts, where it's actually sort of the negative thoughts that an individual has about themselves or about society, or actually the negative thoughts they have about society could actually be interpreted with the same negative thoughts that they have about themselves, and they sort of project that out onto the world, and because it confuses them, it eventually sort of provokes it even more. And I guess and I'm not very, I guess, entirely versed in this subject myself. However, it seems rather logical. I can actually sort of see, even in myself, and how I'll maybe have a habit that isn't necessarily good for, let's say, my roommates, and then I'll try to accuse them of doing the exact same thing and try to correct this, because you're doing this wrong, but it's like, but I'm doing the same exact thing myself, and it's
Yes.
very interesting.
Yes, it happens to us all. I mean, one of my issues, a lot of these issues actually arise in the family. This kind of idea of projection. It's like, you see, our families are more like us than we would like to believe a lot of the times. And I've had my own experience with this with my mother. It's like, I see her doing a lot of the same things that I do, and I hate the things that I do. So, of course, I get mad at her for doing the things that I'm doing. So it's just ridiculous. And as soon as you realize that, you can actually begin to repair some of the relationships, and you can actually begin to repair the state of your own being. You can begin to feel better. You can identify as an individual rather than a group. But just because you identify as an individual doesn't mean you don't have to care about your group. Doesn't mean you don't have to care about people. I mean, if you see it on the bigger picture, if you take the right brain perspective as far as you can go, I mean, you're really just the aperture through which the universe experiences yourself. That's a real collectivist thinking, because guess what? Because then you're a part of everything, and you're connected to the whole freaking cosmos.
Yeah, that's it.
But, without getting too voodoo or spiritual, why don't we show them some of the videos that actually can that show kind of the bridging of the divide.
Bridging, or the sort of dichotomy. Yeah. So and I guess, let's first tell our story about, let's say, our experience in Washington, D.C. So a few months back in February, there was the event CPAC. CPAC 2018. It's the Conservative Political Action Conference, and we flew out to DC. This was my first time in Washington DC. So the first day we arrived, we did a lot of touring of the different sites in DC, and it was a very, very fun, profound experience for myself, visiting my capital of my country, seeing where all this sort of government craziness goes on, and so. We did it, we saw all the good sites, and we can, and I could go on and on and on about the sort of the breadth and sort of the sort of awe that I had. But it came down. There was this one. We had taken a tour of the U.S. Capitol, and upon our exit of the U.S. Capitol, we heard a lot of commotion, and so we ran up these stairs to try to see what is all this commotion, and all of a sudden we see. Coming down the street that actually leads up to the U.S. Capitol, there was a very, very large of a few hundred high school students, and they were marching in a sort of protest led by many. I would assume they're teachers and different political organizers, and it was they were marching against the Capitol for gun control, and so me and Ben approached them. And decided to try to talk with some of them and try to maybe provoke a little bit of dialogue, I guess. And we kind of went in quickly, and we just kind of sat there and just waited for people to approach us. We didn't necessarily dive in. We went up to the sides.
I'm pretty sure I went up and started yelling.
Yeah, you were a lot more, I guess, you were a lot more energetic and provocative in a sense.
Yeah, I was doing exactly what you're not supposed to do, but I guess I was a different man.
You gotta learn, and this is actually kind of what sort of, I guess, implored us to explore this topic, because we've learned from experience. And so I was out on the sidelines, and he went into the group, and I was waiting for others just to come out and talk to me, because I wanted this dialogue. He wanted to provoke a little more and see what the reaction was from these children, because that's who they were. They were all high school kids. They were a few years younger than us, so they were we could still relate to them to some extent. And so so there was a protest, and we engaged in a lot of yelling and a lot of sort of division, and it was very, very surreal. It was very conflicting.
There were however times on top of that where the debate in the discussion was actually taking place. Actual civil discourse was taking place, and we were discussing ideas. When I first went in there, like Trevor said, the first thing I started chanting was, arm the teachers, save the children, arm the teachers. And I started getting chanted at by about 200 kids, screaming, go home, go home, go home. And I heard, you're an effing idiot. You sound like a stupid, bitch. You sound like a lot of, you sound like you have a cock in your mouth. That was one one thing I heard, and I was getting interviewed by like some of these news organizations that were in the area, and some girl just walked up and said that while it was on, you know, being interviewed. So it was pretty heated. At one point, you know, when me and Trevor ended up, you know, when the crowd actually ended up engulfing us, that's more like what happened.
Yeah, it was just me and we were the only two there, and there was hundreds of kids surrounding us, chanting and yelling and all this stuff. You know, you were just sitting there and just being bombarded. It was crazy.
Me and him were back to back in the middle of this crowd because like it was freaky because we were surrounded by these kids, and you know, I had these backwoods that I had bought, Blackwoods that. Is it backwoods or blackwoods? Anyways, this is a cigar. But yeah, you know, I was gonna smoke them because you know I was in DC and I was, you know, like just kind of walking.
It was
around
vacation for us.
Yeah, it was vacation for us. And you know, one of these kids just grabs them out of my pocket and just crushes them right out of there. And he starts flipping my hat. One kid grabbed my phone out of my pocket. I got kicked. I got shoved. And I'm assuming Trevor felt some of the same things, although I was being a little bit more provocative.
Yep.
So maybe I experienced.
Yeah, you experienced a little more violent than I did, but I got my hat, you know, hit. I got pushed around. I got kicked. I got, you know, yelled at, insulted. All, you know, all the rest of it. And
yes. And I actually ended up getting pulled out by the police because the kid who did take my backwoods, I was like pretty pissed. I kind of wanted to punch him. Let's just say that. I grabbed him by the arm and I put my fist up and I'm like, let it go right now. And then the cop came and grabbed me and dragged me away. And I was like, but he stole my property. And I was like pissed and flustered. I was, it was an experience. But there was actually this one moment when I was talking to these two black gentlemen and also this one younger lady. And we were talking about these gun rights, and a Politico photographer ended up taking our picture, and the picture is honestly very telling because at this time when the picture was taken, I was actually having civil discourse. I was actually talking dialogue. Although they were kind of saying some mean things here and there, we were actually discussing ideas and what they think. And these people made a little video on this picture and kind of discussed kind of the body language and what they saw in the picture. So we can show that.
This is and these two individuals that are analyzing this picture, they definitely have the sort of left tilt. I don't know what their political what their political leanings are, but I'm assuming, just judging from the sort of dialectic,
the generalizations
that they were sort of explaining, at least in the video, it seems they definitely they side with the gun active or the anti-gun activists and sort of the lefter side of things. So we'll go into this video. It's a longer video. I guess so. If you're watching on YouTube, you can listen to the parts that you want to listen to. Where we will discuss it more afterwards. But yeah, this is just an analysis between two, I guess, journalists in DC and how they analyze and view this sort of polarizing divide, or maybe there's a bridge.
They just kind of analyze the picture.
They analyze the picture, and so we'll go into that here, and we'll see you on the other side there.
But I think let's keep the focus on on this theme of young people, because it's very clear in these photos we're working with today. So let's move on to this image, and Michael, you're going to have a caption for us.
Yeah, the caption, the photos by John Schinkel from Politico, and all three of these photos, by the way, as you mentioned, are ones that were a little bit like off the beaten path. They were photos that really jumped out at me, but they're not ones that circulated widely. So. The caption on this one is John Uphold, 20, of Duluth, Minnesota, engages with local teenagers rallying for gun safety law reform in the wake of the Parkland, Florida shooting on February 21, 2018. Uphold is in town for CPAC and was at the Capitol for a tour with his friend Trevor Thompson, also from Duluth, Minnesota. So,
and quickly remind us, Michael, what is CPAC, in case people might not know?
It's wow, the Conservative Political Action Committee. Is that
yeah,
I'm not
it's
actually sure, but it's
a big rally conservative event, and it's like a big rah-rah hoorah kind of thing that happens every year, right?
So I referenced this morning as the Conservative Super Bowl, and the fact that it's also a very prominent platform for the NRA tells you probably as much as you need to know. So
yeah, Wayne LaPierre spoke this week. President Trump was there, I think, yesterday.
or maybe today or something. Mike Pence was a big figure. The woman, Loesch, Diane Loesch, who was at the debate and the town hall on CNN on gun violence. She was there and showing a much different type of body language and affect at the NRI convention and when she was talking with the students. So yeah.
Yeah, so this is the frame for this picture and the next picture we're going to talk about. So it's good to kind of have a little bit of that context.
Right, we go CPAC right here. Yep.
Yeah,
and,
you know, this photo, when I first looked at this photo, I realized that it was it's set up in a way to suggest confrontation, and I think part of that is psychological. So it's this: you have one person and a group of people. You have people of color and a white person. You have obviously the highly symbolic and very charged Trump hat, right? The "Make America Great Again" hat. And then the caption tells us you have kind of local, the kids on the right and out of towners. So what's interesting to me about the photos that at first glance you think, oh, there's some kind of confrontation, maybe there's an argument, right? Obviously this kid might not have a lot in common with this other group of kids, et cetera. But the more I looked at the photo, what really intrigues me about it is it doesn't seem to set up so much a confrontation, even though it's got all of these maybe what we might think of as stereotypical opposites going on in its content. But it's, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think these kids just look confused, and you know, kind of, they don't necessarily seem to be debating or arguing. There just seems to be, and I'm not necessarily sure the group of kids is necessarily listening empathetically either. I don't know how to describe it. It's just kind of confusion and sort of like, who is this kid?
That's really interesting. I had almost the same take. I mean, at first, and that hat, first of all you need is that hat, and that's bait, and it's a provocation. It was designed that way. It functions that way. We react to it most of the time that way. But once you clear that, and you get past the kind of this hard contrast of, you know, literally black and white, the picture starts doing some really you know, some diametric things, and I had the same reaction. I started like just looked at it and was realizing how much, at least the four kids in the foreground, besides like that symmetry of the three black males going in that you know, angle like this, seems like so orderly, and there's something like kind of reassuring about that. And then you've got what looks like a real conversation between four people in the foreground. And I actually not only found it interesting, but actually hopeful that these three kids are listening, you know, so intently to the, you know, quote unquote Trump kid. You don't see any tension in their bodies. You just see interest and communication. And if the kids are bringing us that, even if they're like, you know, we're seeing a lot of polarity, you know, in their beliefs, I mean, bring it on.
Yeah, and I think, and the presence of the young woman in the foreground on the right, she seems to be maybe who the guy in the hat is talking to most directly in terms of where he's looking. And then you have, I mean, a great photo is a photo that makes you want to know more about what happened there. You know, what was that? And that's one of the ways that I think this is a really interesting photo, is it makes me want to know what they were saying, what they were talking about, and how did this group, you know, how did this interaction happen? But what I think is really interesting is how, in some ways, the photo plays on what we might call kind of implicit bias, or you know, implicit stereotypes that we walk around with. So we see these things, right? As you say, the very almost triggering presence of the hat in a context where you have people of multiple races, you immediately kind of think, okay, this is really going to be a tense kind of thing. And I like how the photo challenges me to really look at it and pay closer attention, as you said, that maybe there's something here that's not just about a kind of conflict, right?
Yeah, I do think there's a larger point to be made, and if there's any point to be made today, I think, as we're talking, and I was worried about this all week, and I tweeted and put on Instagram a number of different pictures that were like variations on this theme. I worried a lot this week, and I'm still worried about the issue of black and white. And when you look at the opioid crisis and the imagery, for example, and there was this like huge body of work that was produced by James Noctway in Time this week, and you see the same theme running through it. Opioid crisis has gotten attention because it's really affected the white population, but we're not talking about drugs and how much drugs have been a problem for a long time and how it's been covered in such a pejorative way. And the Stone Douglas kids, especially if you're a liberal, like, more power to them, but that's a high SES school. They're mostly white. If you saw that town hall on CNN, it was a very white audience, and it just is a double standard when it comes to gun violence. And when you look at a photo like this, and then it's a danger because you can stereotype also. I don't know who, where the African American kids and by the way, the white kid with the hat is the only, seems like the only white kid in there. If you look at through all the other kids in there, maybe there's one other, but this is a very mixed group of kids. But the worst thing that would happen as these guys, if they do, are successful in forming a movement, is for this to really have a white face on it, because because if it does, and it is, it's hypocritical. So I just think it's really important to state that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, I think there's also that contrast that's always present between lawmakers in Washington and the makeup of citizens of Washington, D.C. itself too, right?
Absolutely, and that's only been getting more extreme also.
Yeah, so that, and these kids are also participating in a really long history of protests by young people in Washington, D.C., which, is a whole other aspect of things that I don't know but as much about as I should, but that is also really interesting. And maybe
quite an echo.
Yeah. So
we shall overcome.
Yeah, it's probably time for us to.
Oops. All right. So that was kind of an interesting video. You can kind of definitely clearly see the, I guess, the kind of left-leaning kind of speech that is associated in that video with the picture.
So there's just a clear. They had a decent analysis, and they sort of distinguished the sort of the dichotomy in the picture, the sort of divide, between the two, just based on image, right? Because we are analyzing a picture there, right? So you have to take it for what it is, and so they made the sort of immediate distinction. It's a black versus white sort of portrayal. And it strikes your eyes as such very clearly. And so the way I like to look at it is that you have, you do have a very mixed group. If we're dealing in sort of this group debate here, you do have the sort of mixed group versus, yes, the white kids. And so, but should the framework of the discussion of the debate be based around that? And I don't think so. I really don't. It should be entirely based around the issue that was at hand there. Why were they out there? They were out there because their teachers said they're walking out against gun violence. Mm-hmm. They're walking out against this sort of atrocity. But then you also look at the double standard that exists there. Why are they walking out for the gun violence in schools? What about the gun violence that exists in the cities? What about the gun violence that exists even in Washington, D.C., where a hell of a lot more people are killed with guns than in these sort of
guns that
school shooting scenarios?
Guns that they supposedly don't even want to ban, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. It's most of these
handguns.
Most of the gun violence we see is done with handguns, and who knows how many of the handguns are actually legally obtained or legally actually used. And so it's I don't know.
We're gonna actually add a couple videos that we forgot to do real quick here, so there might be some blackout of the screen, but I'll see if I can be able to keep talking to you guys while we do that.
Yeah, I mean, the video that we want to get into next is, I guess, the anger subject, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
do we want to show Do we want to show the Jordan Peterson or the?
Yeah, so we can show that. So there's a video of Jordan Peterson talking to Dave Rubin about anger and about the pursuit. The sort of what free speech or what is dialogue. And
this will really segue us into the next segment of our podcast today. So just hang tight for a second.
So I'll give you here that.
Rule number 9: assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. I have a little of that at the moment.
Yes. Well, that's what a good conversation is about. It's like, because what you want to do is you want to enter into a conversation so that you come out wiser than you went in. And so the best example of this is when you're having an argument with your intimate partner, let's say. It's like, because you're going to want to win. And then, especially if you get angry, because anger wants to win. It's okay. So then you got to think, okay, well, wait a second. We better sort out what winning means here. So let's say that you're more verbally fluent than your partner and more treacherous. So you can win. That doesn't mean you're right, first of all. That's a big problem. Winning when you're wrong is a really bad idea, because then you think you're right and you're not. And then, well, maybe the person can see things you can't, but can't verbalize them quite as well. It's like, well, you might want to listen, just because there's the possibility that they're trying to tell you how not to run headlong into a brick wall. There's some possibility of that. And so maybe you even have to help them formulate. It's like, okay, I don't get exactly what you're saying. I don't get exactly why you're annoyed. I'm not sure exactly what you want me to do to change it. Let's get this clear. And then I'm going to think about it. It's like, maybe you're right. I'm going to see if possibly you're right. I'm not going to roll over because I would rather you weren't right. I'm not going to change unless I'm convinced, but I am going to listen because I would rather not run headlong into a brick wall if I don't have to. And so that's the idea with the conversation. It's like, and this is, I think, why you're also supposed to listen to your enemies. It's because your enemies will tell you, like they'll tell you all sorts of lies about you. And that's not so good. Maybe you'll even get confused about that. But now and then your enemies will tell you something your friends won't. And you think, well, they said 90 things about me that weren't true and like 2 things that were. And so you separate the wheat from the chaff and you think, okay, okay, maybe I was I've tried to learn that a lot in the last year. Maybe I was a little too harsh in that. And I've had people talking to me about my public appearances. They're watching and trying to help me not make mistakes, And then they call me, my friends, they say, well, you're a little arrogant there. You're a little harsh there. You're better when you're not so angry. You're better when you're making some jokes. And I'm listening because, well, I'd rather not have the mistake because the mistakes could be fatal. So it's like, let me know. I don't want to hear it, especially if it's a deep mistake, because then I have to take myself apart, and that's no fun. And maybe a bunch of me has to burn off, which is no fun. But listening, well, and that's, obviously you're good at it, because otherwise you wouldn't be interested in this and your show wouldn't be popular. So you're doing that, obviously.
Somehow I got one thing.
All right, so there was some wise wisdom from the good old Jordan Peterson, Professor Jordan Peterson.
Prophet, holy prophet Jordan
Yeah,
Peterson.
exactly. There's just so much knowledge that he can sort of give us in terms of the sort of, I guess, unpacking very abstract ideas that seem very complicated or maybe seem very simple sometimes. And like something like talking and speaking, it's like, it seems very simple and we do it all the time, but it's like, you have to be careful. You do have to be careful when you're speaking and when you're talking, because, you don't, the words you speak matter, because it's information, it's exploration, it's its venture into the world. And that's I guess how it was. I guess that's why we create languages, to communicate. And so and it's the sort of foundations and definitions that matter when we're speaking to each other. So it's like, if we're going to have, if I have a discussion with somebody from Canada or from England or from Australia, different dialects of English, words and mannerisms mean different things. And so, and the same thing goes for the United States. Being from Minnesota, they're, talking to somebody from Texas or North Carolina or California, there's different mannerisms, there's different dialectics of English that we can, that we engage in. And so, defining, keeping definitions important and speaking clearly and articulately when discussing important topics, and even in our own experience, especially something like guns and gun violence and gun control. It's like those are important, and definitions are very important.
It's very exactly. Like, just to add on to that, it's if you can be having, I've had this many times, where you're having an argument with someone, but one person has an idea of what the argument's about, and the other person has an idea of what the argument's about. And honestly, like, when you're arguing, a lot of times it'll it'll go into this, and somebody will bring in some other thing that happened, and then justify why they're mad about this thing that you're talking about. And then all of a sudden it's all these different avenues of all these different arguments that are to be had, with all these subconscious reasons that we're mad at the other person for whatever reason. And that's why, going along with what Trevor said, that it's really important that each party who's engaged in whatever discussion, argument, whatever you want to call it, knows what it is about. Because if they don't, then what I just said would happen, where all these different avenues of anger and resentment and whatever other reason that people have to be mad at each other.
Yeah, it's like, what are the motivations behind the conversation in the first place? If the motivation is just for this one individual, just to be completely, just dedicated to, I'm right, I need to prove you wrong. I need to show you how, I need to humiliate you. I need to, I need to like convince you. It's like, in terms of debate, usually when you're in debate, it's like you're convincing the audience, not the person. But like, if you're in dialogue, right? Dialogue should just be it should be in the pursuit of some sort of knowledge. Like, you're not trying to. It's not. Dialogue isn't always just meant to change your mind, right? It's to sort of guide your thinking. Because when you speak, you're just thinking out loud. You're thinking for the world to see. It's what you decide. The speech that you use is the decisions you make. It's like you're just in this moment. You're deciding exactly what you want to be heard as. What lens or framework you sort of decide. How dilated or constricted that view is into like you.
So this is really just like laying, the first layer of bricks of the freedom framework. We've got to establish this, pursuit of truth, this willingness to listen. And I think that one of the easiest ways to do that, and we actually have a video that we're going to have to show you here real quick. One of the easiest ways to do that is to know that if you're angry, you're being stupid. Now, let's loop that back to the science of polarization. Anger is a response that comes from the mammalian brain, not your human brain, not your prefrontal cortex, not the part that's engaged in reasoning. So, maybe everyone's justified, to be angry. There's reasons to be angry because there is injustice in the world. There is suffering in the world. But know that you're not going to make a good decision when you're angry. You're not going to make things better by being angry, because the part of your brain that is activated during these states of anger is, associated with very irrational behaviors, rage, anger. The amygdala produces these responses. Yep. And you're not going to be in a good state of mind. You're not going to create anything good. I mean, think about it. If you stay calm, cool, and collected when somebody's mad at you instead of, getting mad back at them, you're actually going to be able to figure out maybe what the other person is angry about and then improve yourself as a result. So now Trevor's going to add here the...
And you can kind of, who is this guy, this next video we're going to show, is he some sort of spiritual kind of guy? He's kind of taking a spiritual
his name is Sadhguru, but he kind of really, I really liked this specific segment because a guy comes up and, he talks about the injustice of the world. And, there's a reason to be angry, and he makes that case to Sadhguru, but Sadhguru explains to him, why it's not always the best decision. So, here we go.
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian tradition of prophecy. So, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, there is the role of those who speak truth to power, who speak out against injustice, who sacrifice themselves for a cause because of injustice. And there, in that narrative, there is anger and there is rage. And there are significant groups of people in the world, in our country, who have due cause to be angry about the world. The refugee, the ethnic minority, the poor. And one thing about inner engineering and sort of finding peace within oneself, the other side of that coin is, is there ever a time to be angry, to march, to be enraged at the injustice of the world? What would you say to that?
Che, I know this is not a popular name in America. Che Guevara said, if you're in rage, you're one of us. I said, if you're out of rage, you're one of us. If you're really out of rage, you're definitely one of us, because you think there is a reason for your anger, which is a wrong perception. If you look at it, people get terribly angry with their loved ones. There's a whole lot of violence within the homes because they get terribly angry with their loved ones, somebody that they're living with, and they have a good reason to get angry because she did not cook the breakfast properly, or the dog peed where it's not supposed to pee. Or I've seen people yelling and screaming and breaking their clubs on a golf course where they're just having a good time. So I'm saying everybody has a reason to be angry. Anger means just this. When you're angry, as a doctor, you know today that when you're angry, literally you're generating poison in the system, literally. If you are poisoning yourself internally, and when you're angry, you know you do the most idiotic things in your life. When you turn back and see, you can't believe you did it. But most idiotic things happen when you're angry. So I'm asking, is anger an intelligent expression of human life or an idiotic expression of human life? Hello? Idiotic. So that's all you need to know. The next time you're angry, you just know you're stupid.
Yes. There's a thin line between love and hate. Is it really real or is it really fake? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, we get angry at the ones we love the most. In fact, if I go back and think of the times I've been the most angry, well, other than times that I've been mad at liberals.
Yeah, right.
I've been angriest at my family, but I love my family.
Yeah.
Why? Why is that? It's very interesting. I like what he said. Anger is not an intelligent expression of human life. It's just not, it's using one of the older parts of our brain. It's using the part of the brain that monkeys have and that, animals have. It's the mammalian brain. That's how we work. We were animals a lot longer than we were humans, than we were developed humans. This part of our brain, this newly formed, prefrontal cortex, is a very new part of our biology. It allows us to do these things. It allows us to calm ourselves. It allows us to, think rationally and logically, And if we succumb to anger, we're not using that part of our brain. So, of course, it's not an intelligent expression of human life. And we have to realize that. We have to know that, yes, maybe there is a reason to be angry. But anger is not going to solve your problem. And that's the key. Anger happens. People are justified in their anger often. But guess what? You'll figure out how to solve what's making you angry faster if you think and you know that you're stupid when you're angry. And it's as simple as that.
And it's almost, and I think I can make this determination. It's if you are acting out of anger, if you are angry, you are not being free. You are not acting freely. And so it's like you are gripped by the poison or a force that exists in you, or that is, strangling you or grabbing you by the collar and telling you to think or act a certain way, act out of intuition, act out of the sort of, grotesque, violent emotion that erupts in you. And so, in the freedom framework, I think the first determination that we can make is that do not act out of anger. Anger is you're not acting freely when exactly.
Use your anger.
Yeah,
it makes you stronger.
Yeah, exactly. We can find some interesting philosophy from Star Wars.
These pop culture, man.
I mean, exactly. Like they get, Hollywood. Yeah, you can have your criticisms, and we obviously all do, and they definitely. But it's like there are lessons to be. There are stories. There are archetypes.
Yes,
exactly.
And I think that's one of the things that I like what Trevor. Anger, it grips you. The ancients used to think that those were gods that did that. Mars, the god of war, it was the god of anger. He grips you. He makes you. You're under his control when you're angry.
Yep.
You aren't in control. He's in control. He's pulling your strings. Anger is pulling your strings, and it's making you not think properly.
Nope. And so it's like. Yeah, that's the first determination for the framework, is that, you can't act out of anger. Exactly. Anger does not lead to dialectic. Anger leads to destructive debate.
Yes.
And not civil discourse.
And so this leads us to the second layer of the framework that we are constructing here. How to help the stupid, or in other words, how to help the angry people who are mad. Well, first thing, don't make them freaking angry. Don't provoke them.
That's at least, yeah. I mean, so, it's like, it's when I go on YouTube, it's so entertaining to watch. These people just go into these crowds, whether it's Owen Troyer or even Alex Jones does it too.
Yeah,
or,
it's great. It's
or even Steven Crowder, or some of these prolific sort of figures in our alternative media sex. It's like, the provoking, it's entertaining, it really is. And it's, it's satisfying when the liberal gets,
when you're winning,
when the liberal gets wrecked
destroyed.
or whatever, destroyed.
Yes.
But it's like, it's not as constructive as we hope to be. Sometimes it's destructive.
And this leads us back to what Jordan was saying, right?
Yep.
About think the person you're talking to knows something you don't.
Yeah, despite their sort of, flawed political leanings, or their flawed identifications, and their sort of broad brushing accusations, it's like there's definitely something that they know. That is important, that is credible, that needs to be heard. However, it gets so drowned out by the rhetoric and the vitriol and the political nonsense that it's near impossible to flesh it out from them. And and I experienced this very, 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 I guess, provocatively. I was at this forum, right? It was a candidate forum here in Duluth where. They had all their congressional candidates for the U.S. Congress, and they had this sort of I guess, discussion, a lot of questions they asked of these candidates and so forth. And, afterwards there was there was a sort of common area that everybody would go to talk to. And I approached this gentleman who was, I don't know, I just wanted to talk to him. It was mostly a liberal event. And so I was assuming that I was approaching a liberal. I couldn't tell by his appearance because, it's really hard for me anyway because I try not to make those distinctions. But very quickly into the conversation, I could tell, where he was coming from because it was almost like a programmed rhetoric coming out of his mouth.
Yeah, you can predict what they're saying.
And exactly.
That's when you know it's a pathology.
It went into like all this single payer healthcare and feminism and all these, the patriarchy and all this stuff. And it's like I could predict what he was going to say before he was going to say it. And it's so hard to have a conversation with this individual. It took me to talk with him after I let him spew out all his rhetoric and all of his just pathological ideology. By the time he was done, he had nothing left to say so that I could actually challenge him and ask him real questions. And when that happened, he got very frustrated, and it was he's like sweating, and it was hard. And we were getting into deep philosophy, and eventually ended up we were the last two people there because we were talking for about 2.5 hours. And it was like eventually by the end of it, we were actually making ground. We were actually discovering things that were important. We were actually questioning each other and trying to flesh out differences in or I guess areas of difference that was completely abstract to the sort of polar Republican, democratic, socialist ideologies. And when we were in that unknown area, we were actually sort of bringing forth real ideas and real debates.
So on that note, Trevor, he clearly that kid was angry, and Trevor, kind of has in his own experience, debating these people or discussing with these people, how to, kind of cool down the heat, kind of how to put the ice down and how to, really talk about ideas. He asks questions. He's using like the Socratic method.
Exactly,
he's making him think. He's making him think. He's not making him react. He's making him think.
Yes.
And so now this is going to lead us on to the third level of the framework, the next layer of bricks, as it were. Know how people are influenced. Okay? This is how we can make sure that the stupid or the angry, don't get angry. How do we do that? Reciprocity, reciprocal altruism. Well, what are those? Well, these are, offer them something, give them something of value, explain to them, the benefit that both of you can mutually have by discussing ideas, by searching for truth, by, if you think you have a good idea, make sure it's a win-win. You want it to be a win-win. You don't want it to be a win-lose. And especially you don't want it to be a lose-lose, which is what most debates end up being. Because both go out getting pissed at each other instead of coming up to
both are angry, then it's like the sort of the story of the Leviathan. You have just oh gosh, if I can't have what my point, then nobody can have a point. It's just like if I can't get my way, then nobody can get their way. And it's just this ripping, just destructive force, and it's just like, gosh, like look out, like this is the stuff we have to look out for. And we can look at our history and we can see how it goes, and it's very obvious. It's like we just got to take it slowly. They try to get this progressivism sort of thing. We got to progress in society. It's like you can't go too quick here because you have radical change. Look at what happened in Maoist China. Look what happened in the Soviet Union. Look at what happened in Europe. When there's radical change in quickly changing times, there is chaos. The people who, and it's it's not even just the smart. It's like, yes, the smart are these elites or are the leaders of these movements. Yeah, they make it out because they're the ones doing all the sort of manipulation and control.
I don't remember the statistic, but I do remember Jordan Peterson saying that being smart or like having a high IQ, you need that in order to be able to change environments quickly. Well, it's not like, moving from point A to B in a space-time. It's like you're changing environments when you're changing your belief systems. You're changing your environments when you're changing the political atmosphere. You're changing your environments when you're changing the free market atmosphere. So, if we completely just throw all that out the window, like people aren't going to know what to do because they're accustomed to things, they're programmed to work certain ways. I'm not saying that we don't have free will or anything, but it's like we are kind of robots in a certain sense, right?
Yeah, we definitely react to our environment. And so this is like when we look at how we are influenced and how others are influenced. It's like emotion does play a big role. Our emotional attachments play a big role, and influence. It's like when it's I guess emotional headlines. That's why they have these clickbait sort of headlines and these these big headlines about you got to care about the kids. You got to do all this. And it's
you just made a great point, Trevor.
Emotion is very important.
You just made a great point with commitments. That's another way people are influenced, to add on to this layer. Honor commitments. When people commit to a side, when they attach themselves to something, they're more inclined to stick with that side because, number one, it's a part of their identity, like we discussed earlier, as a beliefs and morals being assets for people to feel like they fit in or whatever. And, it's just the fact that, if you're in a social group, let's say, and everybody in your friend group's a liberal, and then all of a sudden you're a Trump supporter, everybody's going to hate you. Why would you do that, right? That's not smart if you want to keep your friends. Of course not. That sucks. Why would you ever do that? So honor commitments are a huge part of the way that people are influenced. When you commit to something, you're obligated to follow in its path.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, the next thing, it's like, if we're going to look at these sort of values or these sort of things as assets or these commitments, it's like, then you need a free marketplace for these commitments and assets to be discussed. You need a sort of free atmosphere, free speech to discuss these things, and you cannot sort of abstract an authority to determine the environment and framing of that discussion.
Authority. You just made
completely
another great
distributed
point.
and completely sort of open for this environment. And so it's like, obviously I'm against hate speech. Obviously I'm against violent speech against others. But we have to be very careful in who we decide to sort of control it or silence it. And so we have to be able to sort of take a look at it and see, especially when it comes to controlled speech or compelled speech, it's like, who's making the decision? And most of the time it's the people you don't want making that decision.
Yeah, so then to add on to that, you just mentioned authority. That is another way that people are hugely influenced. I mean, if you've ever go on Netflix and watch The Push, whoa, it'll blow your mind. People will be put into an authority figure. I think there's one story where it's there's a guy working in a cafeteria. And there's a woman there who's an actor with a baby carriage, and the baby's in it. The baby's fake. The baby's not real, so don't worry. But what they do is they have this guy call this one guy. He pretends to be a detective or an authority figure and actually convinces this one worker who's working at this cafeteria to take the baby out because he told the cafeteria worker that the woman was a child abductor, so he was going to go and save the child, and he did this and just walked away with this woman's baby just because a authority figure told him to do that. So just because somebody is in a position of authority, it can make us do the most evil and irrational things that you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And so that's another way that people are influenced. You have to realize that a lot of these people who are in these groups and chanting things, they're doing this because their idols, their authority figures, are telling them to.
Yeah, that it's okay. It's you must these chants work. They're concise, whatever, but it's like, you're chanting like it's a ritual. You're chanting like it's a cult, like it's weird. I'm sorry. When they racists off our streets, fascist bigots go away, or whatever it is. Like, it's so just, it's like, what the hell? Like, come on.
And that adds on.
Like, what kind of... Like, it's so weird. Like, even like when we're sitting in the crowd, like when I go to a political speech and people start chanting USA, it's eerie. It's weird. Like, yeah, it's you know, it's fun. You know, USA, but it's also eerie and weird. It's like, you know, I like to think of myself as a patriot and I love my country, but it's like, do I need to sit and chant with other people about how it's, you know,
instead of discussing,
USA,
we gotta just
rather
chant.
than just, you know, be, yeah, we're part of the greatest country ever conceived. Okay, we know this.
Yeah. And so, you know, that
But
kind of
apparently
adds
to
on
the
to
left,
what,
apparently
what
not.
the next part is. The extra brick on this layer of know how people are influenced is social proof. Okay? When people are in groups of people, let's say you have 100 people, you know, versus 2, right? The 100 people obviously seem like they have more of a legitimate argument because there's just more people, right? So it's like me and Trevor, 2 of us versus like anywhere from 100 to 300 kids, you know. The 100 to 300 kids think that they're in the right. Of course they do. And they get put, and that goes back to, you know, the AIDS Skrillex guy, right? All those protesters, you know, it's one Trump supporter, Owen Schroyer, versus all those protesters. All those protesters, of course, are going to think they're right, and they're probably going to act differently than if they would if they were in a one-on-one situation with Owen Schroyer, because there's all that social proof around them. They can say ridiculous things because they're validated by all of their peers. They can say that you're Hitler. They can say that you're racist because there's so much validation around them.
Yeah, and you know, this is good because we've made sort of these distinctions. We've made these. We've tried to unpack some of these, you know, these very abstract, these very, I guess, complicated issues. You know, what forces, you know, involve us in discussion? What forces involve us in irrational or rational debate, discussion, and so. Yeah, I think this is definitely. I think we're getting to something here. You know, this is the second episode of our Freedom Framework podcast, and you know, with the MindFrame, you know, we are exploring these ideas, and you know, we implore the audience and those who are viewing to tell us what you think. You know, tell us what you think. You know, whether it's the YouTube comments, the Twitch comments, you know, whether you're emailing us or you're following us on minds.com. Or even on our Facebook or our Twitter, you know, tell us what you think. You know, tell us, you know, how do you think this would fit into the framework? And if you have an offer or an idea
or even
to
want to
add
come
to
on the show
to the framework, or you want to come on to the show, exactly, then we'll get you on here and we'll start talking about it, because we do want to add a segment in this podcast where we start talking to people in the audience, whether it's pulling people up on Skype or you know, Discord, whatever other applications are out there, and involving others into this discussion, because we want to, you know, with the Freedom Framework, we want to have an involved community. You know, a community where we're in the pursuit of freedom. We're in the pursuit of a truth, and you know, figuring out how to repair some of this polarized and divisive politics that has really, I guess, you know, caused a chasm between the right and the left. And I think it's actually completely past that. I don't think it's entirely politically bound, right? You know, there is this chasm that is open, that has been opened by our dividing politics. That, you know, let's try to start building some bridges. Let's start, you know, building a platform or rebuilding the platform for our country and for the world.
Speaking of building bridges, one of the best ways to do that, to add on to the layer of how people are influenced. Smile at them. You know, project positive emotion. If you can show them that you know, you're not mad, you're not frustrated, you're not judging them, and you're genuinely having a good time, and you're even enjoying and interested about what those people are going to say. You know, we actually have these things in our brains called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons, if I'm smiling, you're more likely to smile. It's almost like a contact high. It's like, even if you smile, like you give yourself a nice smile, you're actually going to fire a bunch of neurotransmitters in your head, and you're going to feel better as a result of that. And it's the same way with people that you're talking to. So you have to project these positive emotions at people. And, you know, that's a great way to bridge a divide, because you can be, you know, you can disagree with someone, but if you can smile at them and pat them on the back when you're done, you are going to have a positive result.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. You know, and we're making good ground here. and just smile. And you know, and sometimes you gotta tell people to slow down. Maybe tell yourself to slow down.
Maybe you should shut up.
Yeah, exactly.
Shut up and listen.
Know when to shut up and listen. Absolutely.
Yes, that's another brick right there.
Another brick.
Shut up.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, listen and watch them like a hawk, because you know they might not have the purest intentions.
Yep.
You know, and if you shut up and watch them like a hawk long enough, maybe they'll actually reveal to you what their true intentions are.
Yep.
If you're having a problem with your family member, a friend, somebody you're debating with, whoever it is, shut up and watch them, because maybe you're wrong.
Yep.
Maybe you're wrong.
Maybe we are wrong.
You know?
You never know.
And that will conclude the third part of the framework. And for what can we do about anger? Because, like, you know, anger is hard to control. There's no doubt about it. I was really mad today. Holy crap, do I cuss and scream about my computer science homework. I seriously cannot handle it. It's really bad. And it's like, I guess I was like, you think I'm using my mammalian brain while I'm doing computer science? You think I'm going to be able to do the logical and abstracted reasoning that's required in order to, you know, find a proof for this algorithm? Hell no.
Hell no.
No, and here I am just screaming.
The goddamn, yeah.
Getting pissed. So what do we do to mitigate this?
Well,
meditation.
Meditation. Wim Hof. There's so many things out there. You know, everybody has their own. I think everybody can find their own distinct, whether it's a ritual of their own or their own practice or exercise that they have. But you gotta be mindful, and you gotta find a something that just quells and calms you down, because you can get worked up, you can get fiery, and you can get, you can get engaged in a very, I guess, get into a frame of mind where it seems like you can't get out. But if you develop a routine,
take a nice deep breath,
exercise that is effective at getting you out of that state of mind, then that's what you got to do.
Yes. And you're more than right. And actually, there's all kinds of scientific evidence to suggest that. You think we'd leave out the scientific evidence? Of course not. So here we go. We'll switch to the team viewer real quick. This is a study that was done. The regulation of neural circuitry of emotion by compassion meditation. Interesting. Compassion. Yes, this is just one of the many studies that are done on the different parts of the brain that we can learn to actually control. We can learn to, put that mammalian brain into submission, make him nice and happy, strong, healthy, and happy. And that's one thing that, I really want to do a podcast about Wim Hof, because I think it's like meditation times 20. Because, you're doing the breathing, you're triggering an adrenaline response, which is deeply rooted in our physiology. Like, you're really making yourself freak out, but you're learning to control it. You're learning to control that.
And almost at least the first thing that I learned is that, you're triggering this adrenaline and all this stuff, but you can learn how to actually slow your heart. Your heart rate doesn't race. Maybe in the first couple times it does, but eventually you just learn, and your heart rate just doesn't start racing and pumping. It's like you learn how to just sort of slow it down and get it into this sort of rhythm that you can feel it, and you're controlling it. And I've actually used it, and it's helped me when I get nervous and so on. Like when I go to do, like, let's say a speech at school or a presentation, I want to speak up, I want to challenge the liberal professor. I want to I guess interject, the sort of interject against the sort of Marxist teachings that sort of happen in our educational institutions, especially in our public ones, public universities. University of Minnesota,
So he's really right. You get in, going up and, like Trevor said, talking to those liberal professors who are really smart, because guess what? They've read a lot of books and they're a hell of a lot older than we are. Learning how to meditate and just kind of take a deep breath and really makes that anxiety go right away. And and that's one of the things that we really, really have to learn, because anxiety and depression and all these really bad things, it's just a result of us being in our heads. Get in the moment, man. Get in the moment and live and feel the full power of your own psyche, the full power of your own happiness. I mean, you can really learn to access these things with meditation. And, there's scientific evidence to back it up. And Trevor said, you can learn how to control your heart rate. There's all kinds of technology, too, like heart rate variability that can teach you how to, control your heart rate so that you can, learn how to be more comfortable with life, learn how to be more comfortable with adverse situations.
Because that's like we do, once you sort of learn about this stuff and you start, really become, I guess, inspired by, the principles of America, patriotism and freedom, and this sort of, when you start taking back your own autonomy, it becomes, you become, I guess, sort of skeptical and nervous about others who you may be questioned to challenge your autonomy, to challenge your freedom. And so, it becomes, your responsibility to, I guess, interject against those who are trying to indoctrinate or sort of brainwash your peers. If you're in school, college, even high school, or even in the workplace, you gotta stand up for your individuality, your power as an individual to get what the task is done, but also do it in a way that is I guess respectable and I guess meaningful and I guess what else, make it matter to the extent where it's like your personal responsibility is fulfilling. It's meaningful. It gives you a direction and purpose that matters not only to yourself but others, because people will look at you as look at how confident this individual is. Look at how confident he is in his decisions and his responsibilities and his freedom, and it's a beautiful thing, I think.
And I think, just to kind of top it off, because we pretty much got every single layer of the freedom framework, and I'll do a quick recap of what those layers are.
The first, not the entire freedom framework.
Yeah, no, not
the first step here.
Well, this is just the framework of civil discourse right here.
Yep.
This is the freedom framework for civil discourse. And the last brick that I want to lay in is embrace your idiocy. Look, I don't know a whole lot, and I realize that. A lot of times I just kind of pull stuff out of my butt because I don't really know what, I don't know statistics off the top of my head. I'm not frickin' Ben Shapiro,
Right, yeah.
Man, like that guy just boom, 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 and one of the best ways is to just not take yourself too freaking seriously.
Yeah.
Like, how do you really know what's good for people? We're just kind of talking here, trying to lay a framework of what we've found through science and through research and through our own experience, anecdotal, of what we think is a great framework for not only us to follow, but for others to follow. And, we're that's like Trevor said, we're open to criticism. We want community engagement. We want to better ourselves, and we want to help other people, become better with us. So embrace how stupid you are, because it's wonderful. Because
it is.
If you think you really have to work very, very hard to convince yourself that you're smart, because honestly, the more you know you don't know, is what I figured out.
That's actually a quote out of Plato's Republic. I think Socrates said that, to know is to know that you know nothing. I mean, sure. I mean, we can go with that. I mean, at least then we can agree.
He who speaks does
because
not
then
know.
it's like, well, you maybe have this ego about yourself that I know so much more than all these people, whatever. But if it's like if you know to know that you know nothing, if everybody can agree with that, then there's ground there to be worked on. There's a platform there that okay, what is nothing? What is something? What can we do about that? Let's start talking about it. And with that, I think is.
That's kind of that kind of concludes it all. I can't really think of anything that we really need to hit on here. I'll just recap the bridging the divide and constructing the framework really quick, which is, number one, the first layer, know if you're angry, you're stupid. And then second, how to help the stupid, don't make them angry. Third layer, know how people are influenced, reciprocity, reciprocal altruism, commitment, social proof, authority.
Look at the authority that exists.
Projection, make positive emotions, and then, are you angry often? The fourth and final layer, ways to avoid it, breathe, meditate, find a practice, a mindfulness practice, and embrace your idiocy.
There we go.
And we'll end it on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you everybody for watching. let us know what you think, whether it's the comments, whether it's minds.com, whether it's
We love you guys.
the Twitch chat. You know, we want the feedback. You know, subscribe on YouTube, like the video, share it with others if you thought it was helpful. If you think we can go somewhere with this, you know, share it and help us grow this community, help us grow this platform, and help us, you know, construct the framework, because we want the help. We want to create something cool. Let's do it.